This is 100 watts and a wire.
Good evening.
The time is 6:30 p.m.
There we go.
Sunday, March.
So maybe we'll talk a little bit about repeaters and lay a groundwork for the repeaters. Steve, you want to talk about repeaters and maybe your first understanding of those when you got in the game over 40 years ago, and maybe
I was heavily involved in it. I mean, but I was more involved on the technical side of it and the building of it and the maintenance. But I was a heavy operator, just because back then in the 70s and the 80s and 90s, it was mayhem. It was just very, very active. Everybody was going back and forth in their commutes, and it was just pretty much some of the busier repeaters were pretty much active all day, all night, and for the most part, it was as new people came along, it was relatively welcoming. There was a few that were
yeah.
that were
Scotty. It's Scotty said. Okay.
that were pretty much they were a little standoffish and they kind of got a little cliquish and things. But it's for the most part, it was fairly welcoming, and then it just kind of slowly, and then eventually, and I think when the cell phones really became popular, it just started really quieting down, and now it's pretty much it's barren wasteland, more or less. I mean, they're there, but it's just not active. There's a few core people that are operating, and some of the things I've noticed, and it's not everywhere, so don't take this. This is just what I'm observing, is that depending on the system or the owner of the repeater, they kind of set the tone and the and how it's gonna, then the vibe, let's more or less. And it could kind of get a little cliquish, and if new people come in, they kind of lose their minds. Others are very welcoming and things, so it kind of runs the gambit. But it's pretty tough, especially for someone new and trying to figure things out, because I've heard people come on, they're kind of figuring their way out, and they're just getting chastised by some of the regular users on that repeater. It's almost like going on to 7200 and mixing it up with those old boys, and you're brand new. Oh, I just got my General. I hear you. I want to, how's my radio? You're going to get annihilated, and that happens, and which is unfortunate. So it's, I mean, each one is different, and it just and I'm guilty of it like everybody else. Is just, I finally just started backing off. It was like, I don't want to deal with the drama, and I just want to chit chat. But sometimes it's like, oh, if your audio is not perfect to what the repeater owner wants, then they'll kind of start criticizing, like, I have no way to tailor it. It's a freaking 2-meter radio. I don't have anything to change the audio on it, so deal with it.
So I'll ask you both guys, because I know Scotty did some research recently. He was studying about repeaters, and I'll just throw it out to either one of you and ask how they work, because I know roughly, and I've made contact with them. I used to check in with the AriesNet, and I know that there is a repeater system somewhere in town, cross town, that my radio is connecting to, that makes it the signal expand, because it can send it out, I guess, in the other direction, or anybody who can actually make contact into that repeater. But how do they work? And either of you or both of you, welcome to talk about it.
Well, I spent my whole career pretty much working on them and building them.
So you don't know anything about it. Scotty,
no,
go!
I know Jack. Diddly squat.
They didn't pay attention now. Okay, no, I mean, go ahead and talk about, like, how does, generally, I mean, what's the point of a repeater?
Well, there's some building blocks. There's the radios, there's the antenna system, and there is a audio processing and signaling component. So let's talk about the radios. You have a receiver, and then you have a transmitter, and those two are, the receiver is going to listen to your transmit, what you transmit on your mobile radio or your handheld, and then it's going to take that audio, and it's going to come out of the receiver, and then it's going to go into some kind of controller, typically, and that could be a single port, it could be a multi-port controller, but a basic repeater controller. Along with that audio, there's going to be some signaling. There's going to be typically two. There's what's called COS, which is carrier operated squelch, and then PL decode or CTCSS decode. So that's that tone that you put in, that when you program, okay, I'm going to operate on this repeater, this 3494 repeater, and I have to send a tone of 100 hertz. Well, there's a decoder in the receiver that's listening for that tone. And once it hears that tone, it sends a signal along with the carrier operated squelch to the controller. The controller then says, oh, I got valid signal here. I'm going to send that audio to the transmitter, and along with the PTT function to key the transmitter. So that's what the controller does. Then you have your antenna system. And so because you're listening on one frequency and you're transmitting on another frequency, there's a couple of ways of accomplishing that. You can have a separate receive antenna and a separate transmitter or transmit antenna. But the typical one is, because a commercial grade, high quality antenna for a repeater is going to run you about $1,400. So now you're dealing with, do you want to buy two of them? Nah, let's just use one plus the feed line. There'll be a device called a duplexer. And basically it's just a bandpass filter, and it just filters and allows the receiver signal to come down the antenna through the filters to go to the receiver, and then opposite. The transmit goes through the duplex filter and then combines and then goes up the same feed line and antenna. So you're using a single antenna, but it's doing it simultaneously as it's transmitting. The duplexer allows the transmitter signal not to interfere into the local receiver, and the local receiver filters out the transmit. And I'm just giving you the high level, but basically the components for a repeater is your RF portion, your transmit receiver, your controller, which is a way to process the audio, and then and the signaling, and then the antenna system, which is derived typically of a duplexer, feed line, and an antenna. So that's your basic components. Now, when you start dealing with linked systems, there's add more complexity.
More
whether
repeaters.
the link is RF or internet based, like VoIP, like Allstar or Echolink or IRLP. There's those are the three big ones, and that interfaces into the controller, and you mix audio, and but that's the basics on how a repeater works.
Well, that's unfortunate, because I was hoping that you would know something about it and could share some information. That was a little short of what I was hoping that you would bring tonight. But that's okay.
Sorry.
Drink.
You'll
That's
get
going to
over
be one of the drinks later. Well, thank you for that, Steve. We're going to take a break here in a second. Scotty, anything more to add to that? Because I do have a question for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jim was asking in the chat what is the cost to build a repeater, and so it depends on really what you want to do with the repeater. If you want a repeater that's going to be put in a commercial environment that needs to be like, maybe it's an Aries repeater for your club that needs to be on all the time, no matter what. It needs to be a hardened system. You're going to need to buy commercial grade radios like Motorola's or like that. Power requirements, all that sort of thing. But if you're looking to do a repeater, maybe put it the antenna up on a tower at your place, and so that you and your local buddies can use it, then you can put together a repeater with a pair of like Yaesu 2900s. Really, the magic between the radios for a repeater is the repeater controller, like Steve was talking. You need a circuit that can take the audio from the receive radio and pass it over to the transmit radio along with the push to talk, and then of course you need the filters so that you can share an antenna. So because with the repeaters we have an offset transmit and receive frequency, and so our filters, or duplexers as they're referred to, or cans, cavities. Allow the use of two different frequency ranges to share an antenna and a feed line, and kind of protects the two radios from each other. So you don't, as one repeater is transmitting, it's not desensing the receiver, because these are running a full duplex, and so they need to have isolation so that they're not crapping on one another. And you can set that up. And if you're doing a repeater at home, you don't have this high energy RF environment to protect your repeater from, or need to protect neighboring repeaters from. In a commercial environment, you're on the tower with a bunch of other repeaters, often in a similar frequency range, and so the quality and depth of your filtering needs to be a high quality, multiple steps of filtering to tighten that bandwidth up, so that you're not getting crapped on by the neighboring tower's antenna, and you're not doing the same to them. So it's a local, a personal sort of, kind of a club level, just kind of casual repeater. It can be done with, a couple off the shelf Yaesus or ICOMs, a repeater controller off eBay for less than $100. And you're on your way.
All right. Well, I gotta say to our audience,
if you're looking at the costs, it's going to be comparable to a nicely equipped HF station with an amplifier, tower, beam, the whole. You're looking at $5,000 to $7,000 with commercial grade equipment and feed line commercial grade antennas, and this is for a commercial site, and so there is quite of an investment into a repeater. So some people get a little testy over it because the amount of money that they put into it. But it's no different than what we have in our typical HF station, or upper end HF station.
To join the 100 Watts in a Wire community, visit 100wattsindawire.com.